Graveyard walk. Sarah's fingernails dug into her palms as she followed Lauren deeper into Magnolia Rest Cemetery. The humidity pressed against her skin like a suffocating blanket, but that wasn't what made breathing difficult. Every step took her closer to plot 247, her brother's grave. Lauren didn't know about Michael or why Sarah had left South Carolina 5 years ago. Nobody did. The moon cast twisted shadows through the Spanish moss, transforming familiar oak trees into looming specters. Sarah had sworn she'd never return to this place, yet here she was, letting Lauren drag her through the cemetery on some ghost hunting adventure. Her childhood best friend had always been obsessed with the paranormal, always chasing the next thrill. But Lauren didn't understand that some ghosts weren't supernatural. They lived in your memories, in your guilt, in the choices you could never take back. "Come on, slowpoke!" Lauren's voice carried through the thick air. The best EVP readings are always near midnight. Sarah forced a weak smile, though Lauren had already turned away. She should tell her, should have told her years ago. After all, Lauren had been Michael's friend too, but the words stayed locked behind her teeth, just like they had that night when she'd found him in the garage, when she'd hesitated those crucial minutes before calling 911, when she'd discovered the note that implicated her in ways she could never explain. The crunch of gravel under her feet became the rhythm of a familiar lie. I wasn't there. I couldn't have known. I didn't see the signs. But she had seen them, all of them. The empty pill bottles, the increasingly erratic texts, the way he'd asked her, so casually over their last dinner, to be the executor of his estate. She'd dismissed each warning flare, too wrapped up in her own impending departure for college, too eager to escape the suffocating smallness of their hometown. Lauren's flashlight beam bounced across weathered headstones, and Sarah's chest tightened. 3 rows away. 2. The granite marker would be just ahead, newer than its neighbors, bearing the dates that defined her greatest failure. She could turn back, make an excuse, claim sudden illness. Instead, she kept walking, each step an act of penance. Perhaps this was why she'd agreed to Lauren's ridiculous midnight adventure. Perhaps after 5 years of running, some part of her needed to face this place, these memories, this truth. But as they approached the familiar section of the cemetery, Sarah froze. Something was wrong. The air felt different here, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. And there in the distance, a figure stood motionless among the graves. A figure that looked impossibly, horrifyingly familiar. "Lauren," Sarah whispered, grabbing her friend's arm. "Do you see that?" Lauren swung her flashlight toward where Sarah pointed, but the beam illuminated only empty air between the headstones. "See what?" Sarah blinked hard. The figure was gone, but the unnatural stillness remained. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Lauren fiddled with her EMF meter, the device's soft beeping, a counterpoint to the chorus of cicadas. "The readings are crazy here," Lauren said, excitement bleeding into her voice. "Something's definitely present." If you only knew, Sarah thought, watching her friend's face glow in the electronic light. The same face that had smiled at her across cafeteria tables, had laughed through countless sleepovers, had cried at Michael's funeral without knowing the whole truth. Lauren moved deeper into the cemetery, her EMF meter leading the way. The device's beeping grew more insistent as they approached a familiar cluster of graves. Sarah's steps slowed, her feet turning to lead as she recognized the path. She'd walked it countless times in her nightmares. "Wait," Sarah called out, but her voice was swallowed by the night air. Lauren stopped suddenly, her flashlight beam fixed on a granite headstone. Fresh flowers lay at its base, white lilies, Michael's favorite. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't brought them. Their mother was in Florida. Who would have? "Sarah," Lauren said quietly, all the excitement drained from her voice. "There's something I need to tell you." But before Lauren could continue, her flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the weak moonlight filtering through the trees. The EMF meter's beeping reached a fever pitch, then fell silent. "Shit," Lauren muttered, shaking the flashlight. "I just changed the batteries." Sarah's eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness. The figure was back, closer now, standing just behind Michael's headstone. The temperature dropped, and Sarah's skin prickled with goosebumps despite the summer heat. "We need to leave." Sarah said, backing away. Now. What? No, this is exactly what we came for. Lauren reached for her arm, but Sarah jerked away, stumbling over an uneven patch of ground. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. As she pushed herself up, her hand brushed against something smooth and cold, Michael's headstone. The memories crashed over her like a wave. Finding him in the garage, the note in his hand, the terrible minutes she'd waited before calling for help. Convinced he was just trying to scare her, to make her stay instead of leaving for college. I knew, Sarah whispered, the confession torn from her throat. I knew he was planning something. He told me in his way, but I didn't want to see it. I didn't want anything to interfere with my plans to leave. Lauren was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with its own confession. I know. Sarah's head snapped up. What? He texted me that night, Lauren said, sinking to her knees beside Sarah. Said you'd need someone when you finally understood. The figure moved closer, moonlight revealing familiar features, Michael's features, but twisted with accusation. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, but his image burned behind her eyelids. I see him, she choked out. God, Lauren, I see him everywhere. Here, in my dreams, in every mirror. He's always watching, always reminding me that I could have saved him if I'd just listened. Sarah. Lauren's voice was gentle but firm. Look at me. Sarah opened her eyes. The figure was gone, but Lauren's face held a different kind of ghost, the weight of a secret long carried. Michael knew you'd blame yourself, Lauren said. That's why he asked me to watch over you. But he also told me something else, something I've waited 5 years to tell you until you were ready to hear it. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, illuminated now by her mysteriously revived flashlight. Sarah recognized the creases, the slight tear at one corner. Her brother's note. This isn't your confession, Sarah. It's his. Read it. Really read it this time. With trembling hands, Sarah unfolded the paper. She'd only skimmed it that night, too panicked to absorb the words. Now she forced herself to read every line. Sarah, by the time you find this, I'll be gone. Don't blame yourself. This was my choice, made long before you planned to leave. You were the only thing keeping me here, and that wasn't fair to either of us. I'm setting you free. Live your life. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Love always, Michael. The paper blurred as tears filled Sarah's eyes. He knew. All this time, he knew he was holding me back. Lauren wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He loved you, Sarah, enough to let you go. The first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting long shadows across the cemetery. But for the first time in 5 years, the shadows didn't feel threatening. They felt like a reminder that even in the darkest places, morning always comes. Sarah placed the note carefully at the base of Michael's headstone, alongside the lilies. You brought these, didn't you? Lauren nodded. Every year on his birthday. I knew eventually you'd be ready to come back. They sat together as the sun rose, two friends sharing the weight of grief and forgiveness. The cemetery was just a cemetery now. No figures in the shadows, no ghosts except the ones they were finally ready to release. As they walked back to Lauren's car, Sarah paused for one last look at Michael's grave. The morning light caught the granite, making it shine like a beacon. She thought of the figure she'd seen, and for the first time she wondered if it had been accusation in those familiar features, or forgiveness. Ready? Lauren asked, keys jingling in her hand. Sarah took a deep breath of the morning air, heavy with the scent of lilies and dew-damp earth. Yeah, she said, I think I finally am. Behind them, the cemetery lay quiet in the growing light, its secrets and shadows giving way to a new day, and perhaps a new beginning.